Hi, everyone. This is Ron from POCculture.com. I'm here with Hiro Kanagawa, who stars in Paramount Plus's Star Trek Discovery. Hiro, how are you?
I'm excellent. How are you?
I'm doing well.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Excited.
It's a great opportunity to reach your audience.
Oh, I appreciate that. I'm a big fan of a lot of your work. You've been in some of my favorite shows like Man in the High Castle, Altered
Oh yeah.
Carbon, and obviously Star Trek.
hmm
Um, but the first question I want to ask you is what's your favorite Bruce Springsteen song?
Oh, let me think about that. Maybe Darkness on the Edge of Town. Yeah. So you know I'm a huge Springsteen fan, obviously.
Yes, I've heard you talk about, in fact, you talked about it in such a passionate way. You've said that
Mhm.
he had such a profound impact on your life. And I would just love to hear a little bit more about how his music was such a big influencer for you.
Well, I grew up after being born in Japan. We moved to North America when I was 3, and I grew up in Guelph, Ontario, and Sterling Heights, Michigan. So I had a very typical North American upbringing. And then when I was 14, my family moved back to Japan. And I got shipped off to a boarding school in Tokyo because my parents lived in Sapporo. So as you can imagine, that was a tremendous culture shock, and I felt tremendously isolated at the age of 14. So in addition to all of the normal teen angst that one might feel, I was tremendously angry about this turn that my life had taken, and it was precisely at that time that I discovered the music of Bruce Springsteen, and specifically that album "Darkness on the Edge of Town." It basically probably came out soon after I moved to Tokyo. So, and I listened to rock music previously. I think Fleetwood Mac's Rumors album, was something that I played a lot. Queen's A Night at the Opera, and so on. But the intensity of that album in particular was something that just blew me away, and opened my world, in terms of how could I channel this angst, this anger that I was feeling, and that album, I guess, kind of gave me a path. And I spent the rest of high school playing in rock bands, basically.
Well, it sounds like you're able to channel it in the right way. It's great that you talk about that transition in your life because I think for those of us in the diaspora, we understand that, right? To grow up in North America and then suddenly go to Asia in our teens, that's like a completely different world that people who haven't experienced that maybe they just think, oh, well, you're Japanese, you went to Japan, like what's the big deal?
Yeah.
How did you kind of deal with those dueling identities of maybe not being Japanese enough and not being, Western
Mhm.
enough?
I don't know that I have, you know, succeeded in dealing with and certainly, especially as an actor, uh, it always comes up. This idea of, are you authentically Asian? Are you authentically Japanese? That is to this day, I think, an issue for many actors who are of Asian descent. Um, there's, obviously, now I speak Japanese, um, but I come from Hokkaido, which is not, and the language, the way we speak Japanese up there is not quite standard. Um, so even though I was at one time fluent, uh, here the other thing is I've lived in North America almost exclusively since college. So, it's a little bit rusty at times. And so, if a role requires me to speak fluent Japanese, um, there can sometimes be a question, especially from Japanese people, native Japanese people. Are you really authentically Japanese? Can you culturally handle the authenticity that we want to see portrayed on screen? Um, and I think that is, remains a huge issue, especially for Asian actors in North America. I don't mind when it comes from Japanese people. It becomes a huge annoyance to me when it's white people telling me I'm not authentically Asian or I'm not authentically Japanese.
And
I
sometimes
think
those
you
are the
can,
loudest voices, aren't they?
I think you can understand that and appreciate that, right?
100%, 100%. We're in this era where you touched on that authenticity topic, where I think there is some effort to increase authenticity in different projects.
Hmm.
But then, like you said, who gets to criticize and who's the loudest voices in those rooms is a very interesting topic. Now, for you, you've been in this industry for a while, so you must really be seeing it evolve. How have you experienced the last, whatever, 5 years or so in terms of roles for Asians, Asian Americans, Asian Canadians? Have you felt a positive trend?
Oh, most definitely there's been a positive trend. I think there was a huge leap forward uh, with Crazy Rich Asians, around, so that, when was that? About 3, 4, 5 years ago now?
2018.
Yeah. So I think that was a huge leap forward. And up until then, things were just kind of progressing in little baby steps. But I think that year here in Canada was also the year that Kim's Convenience premiered. And a year or two earlier, Fresh Off the Boat had premiered. So, there was kind of like suddenly a great leap forward. And then, of course, with the COVID pandemic and then with the BLM movement and all of the consciousness that arose from anti-Asian hate crimes and so on, there has been a tremendous leap forward in terms of in the industry, in terms of the consciousness around these issues, and that has most definitely been very heartening for me to see, because it wasn't not, there was nothing like that in the early days of my career, for sure.
That's great to hear. So you played Dr. Hirai in Star Trek Discovery.
Mhm.
Now, Star Trek has a special place in, I think, a lot of Asian Americans and Western Asian hearts, because obviously Star Trek as a franchise featured one of the first space Asians ever in George Takei's character. So kind of stepping into that franchise, do you feel an extra responsibility given that tradition?
I don't know that I feel a responsibility per se. I certainly feel tremendously privileged and honored to be following in George Takei's footsteps to some extent. And I don't know that the character, that anything is made of his Asianness, which is as it should be, and which aside from the name, I completely appreciate the fact that he's just an individual in the universe, and really, I think that's, as an actor and as a human being, that's where I hope society is moving towards. And what I really appreciate about Star Trek Discovery in particular, even within the Star Trek franchise, is that it's a matriarchal universe. There's so many diverse characters, not just ethnically diverse, but just so many, the gamut of diversity, and it's all just matter of fact, right? It's just, that's the way it is, and to me, that is kind of a utopian vision of our future. So much science fiction is dystopian, but I think Discovery actually presents kind of a utopian vision of what diversity could look like.
That's really well put. And I agree. I feel like Star Trek in general has led the way in many ways of making sure that diversity and this utopic vision is a part of its storytelling. Um,
Mhm.
the character specifically, Dr. Hirai, what was it about the character that attracted you to the project?
Well, it's not like I chose the character. It was actually maybe the third character that I'd read for, and there were maybe the third or fourth, and there were actually a couple of times previously where they came close to casting me, but there were scheduling issues and so on, and it didn't work out. So I'm very glad that it worked out this time, obviously. And there was so much secrecy, and this is true of all shows now. There's so much secrecy during the casting process that very often the scenes that you're auditioning with, aren't actually scenes from the show, right? And so when I auditioned for Dr. Hirai, um, the scenes that I auditioned with weren't actually, you know, didn't really actually have anything to do with him. So I knew nothing about who he was and what his journey might be until I actually saw the first scripts. Um, so I didn't have a hand in choosing that character. The character chose me, and but I'm absolutely thrilled that it worked out the way it did. He's obviously a flawed human being, which I appreciate very much.
Is there, once you found out, okay, this is my character and this is what he's about, and Star Trek in general, is there any kind of deep diving into Star Trek lore or any other kind of preparation that you had to do or just wanted to do for the role?
Well, the first thing I did, because I wasn't all that familiar with Discovery, the first thing I did, I saw the scripts and I go, oh, it looks to me like Dr. Hirai. Oh, there's this character, Dr. Kovich, who is his mentor. Well, I better find out who plays Dr. Kovich. So I went on IMDb and I discovered that it was David Cronenberg. And that just immediately blew my mind from the get-go, to suddenly go from not knowing anything about it to, and then to realize that you're going to have a scene with David Cronenberg. That was just incredible to me. Um, I want to digress a little bit here. I had actually, you know, 25 years ago, I'd actually had a one-on-one meeting with Leonard Nimoy. And so
Interesting.
that was my one previous personal experience with the Star Trek universe. It was, people who are my age will remember that in the 90s, Leonard Nimoy became quite a prominent director. And not just in the Star Trek universe, but he directed Three Men and a Baby, for instance, right?
Yeah.
So he had a lot of diverse projects that he was successful with, and he was developing a movie, a feature film based on Chang and Eng, the original conjoined twins of Barnum and Bailey, P.T. Barnum fame. And so he was scouting around for actors who might be able to handle that. And so I had a 30-40 minute meeting with him here in Vancouver in his hotel. And then after that, I had absolutely no connection with the Star Trek franchise until this role came up. So it's just a great opportunity and privilege for me.
Well, what was it like speaking with Leonard? I mean, what was the kind of impression that you left with after speaking with him?
Oh, he's just a tremendously generous and warm human being who was, genuinely um, had a real enthusiasm about telling the story of Chang and Eng. Now, the crazy thing is, Gene Roddenberry, it turns out, was also, and this is maybe how Leonard Nimoy got interested in Chang and Eng, and because Gene Roddenberry was a huge, huge fan of theirs. And I have heard, and I think this is confirmed, is that Live Long and Prosper, that actually comes from them, apparently.
Really?
It's reputed to be what one of them said on his deathbed to his son.
That's fascinating.
And the green Vulcan blood, they're also, if you read accounts of their death, they're also reputed to have had green blood.
I had no idea.
So, you know,
you're blowing my mind here.
Yeah, so it's very possible that some of these aspects of, the Vulcan character, the green blood and live long and prosper, they may actually have been inspired by Chang and Eng.
That's absolutely fascinating. It's crazy how things come full circle like that.
Hmm.
And so, what was it like during production? How much did you enjoy being a part of that team? And do you have any fun stories to share about the way the cast hangs out together or is close together?
Oh, it's a tremendously close cast, and some shows, you go on them and it's the atmosphere is not particularly warm. It might be tense. Uh, you know, different people might be disgruntled about this, that, and the other thing, um, and it was just such a pleasure being on that show. The It's just such a family atmosphere, and they were so immediately welcoming of me, and that starts with the leadership, right? It starts with the showrunners and the top cast members and the directors, and so I have nothing but great things to tell you about that. Um, I remember my first day I was there for wardrobe, and the studio, of course, is filled with memorabilia from the entire history of the franchise. So it's like, being in a museum to some extent. There's like all these old posters and things from years past. And then this very tall gentleman walked by and introduced himself to me, and it was Doug Jones, of course. And he reminded me that we had actually worked together 25 years previously, but that there was no way I would have recognized him because even then he was in a full prosthetics as an alien, and it was in an Outer Limits episode called It was called Event Horizon or something like that, I believe. But he was once again in that show. He played an alien, and his whole head was covered in prosthetic makeup. So it's true. There was no way I would have recognized him. But immediately that was like a great connection, to realize, oh my God, I had worked with you 25 years ago. Yeah.
That's really great. It just shows how long you've been doing this and how many people you've touched and may not even realize. It sounds like that's a fun experience. If
Hmm.
I could shift gears just real quick, I have to ask you. I really enjoyed you in Lee Shorten's short film Parabola.
Oh, thanks so much.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I know Lee a little bit, and I really enjoyed that film. What I liked was, you have all these Japanese Americans and in the diaspora just putting together this film that almost seems like you're playing this Yakuza character, but that's not really what this story is about.
Hmm.
How much fun was it to be a part of a project like that? Written, directed, and starring Japanese actors.
Oh, it's what's great about it is that especially here in Vancouver, where for so long we've been kind of a colony. You know, we get called Hollywood North, and we're kind of like this satellite of Hollywood itself. Um, and so much of the production obviously is based in the U.S. But over the decades, we've built up this huge pool of talent, and it's so great to see, a lot of these younger Asian artists starting to make their own films. And not only that, but look at a guy like me and go, hey, I want to write something for you where you get to do something that you don't often get to do. And even though I've played Yakuza in the past, you don't often get to see the Yakuza having a family and, having a relationship with the daughter who, right, having a troubled relationship, a fraught relationship with the daughter. And so that was, I think it's a great thing for us as Asians to take some of these archetypes or stereotypes that have been inscribed into the popular imagination, things like yakuzas, for instance, or samurai, or geishas, and then turn those archetypes and inscriptions on their head, blow them up, and bring new understanding and dimension to them, right? And I think that this short film, Parabola, really succeeds in doing that. So I was so thrilled to be a part of that.
I completely agree with that sentiment. And I feel like that's when we talk about authenticity and kind of the next generation of those who are not like only from East Asia or other Asian countries, that there are these stereotypes that once we as creatives can take control of these stories, we can really add the depth and layers that have been missing. And I really thought that that you did that in your character, very emotional role, and that Parabola in general did that.
Yeah, thanks so much. That's
Yeah. So this is going to get also probably a little emotional. Another thing that I really appreciated was that I came upon a song you wrote, Japanese Family on Vacation in 1973.
Oh yeah, wow. Yeah, I'm so glad that you. Yeah, I mean, I have another career up here in Canada as a playwright. So yeah, that's last. And that now that song is a very old song. I wrote that decades ago. Um, but during COVID, there were a lot of initiatives from theaters to keep writers and actors busy, because live theater obviously was dark for 2 years. And there's a company in Toronto called Soul Pepper, um, who had a Zoom series where they invited playwrights to introduce works in progress and so on. And so that was an opportunity for me to reveal that song to the world, which uh, had been dormant for many years, and really that whole that whole Zoom thing and the song itself, it's kind of a true story. A lot of that actually did happen.
Yeah, it was so powerful and emotional for those who are watching this interview and haven't gone to see it yet. It is on YouTube, which I appreciated. It's inspired or based on a road trip that you and your family took to California from Michigan when you were 9.
Mhm.
And as I understand it, you came upon a lot of discrimination, but specifically those who thought you were Native. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it was literally the summer of the siege at Wounded Knee. So throughout the Midwest and the American West, there were such hard feelings against Native Americans, and in those days, this is 1972, 1973, I believe it was. People literally had not ever seen a carload of, you know, Asian people in a dot. We had a duster, a Plymouth Duster that we were driving in. And the other thing is that my father taught in university, and we were actually traveling with another family who were Peruvian. Okay, so the combination of us, right, a Japanese family, and then a Peruvian family. I mean, people just assumed that we were some variety of Native American, and so that's where a lot of that othering and discrimination came from. But that it's not that's not something from the past. My sister, she lives in Eugene, Oregon, but for many years she lived in Montana. And she, in those days she had long, long black hair, which she would, often braid. And she tells me, like, in Montana in the 1990s or even in the early 2000s, she'd walk into a store and the store owner would be like, immediately watching her like an eagle, assuming that she was native. And it's racial profiling, right? Assuming that she was going to shoplift or make trouble of some kind. So that still goes on, sadly, to this day.
Exactly, and that's what was impressed upon me as I was listening to your song, which again is very powerful. But it just struck me how little has changed. As you've referred to earlier about the anti-Asian hate crimes that we all endured over the last few years. Um, isn't it so disappointing how little has changed since 1973?
Yeah, I don't know that it's not so much that things haven't changed. Things did change, but what's even more upsetting and disappointing is that things did change, and now we're going backwards. And that is, it's just so heartbreaking, and uh, and I have a hard time containing my anger against, the people who I think are responsible for that. You know,
Agreed. I mean, I think you're exactly right. I appreciate the clarification. You're right. It seems to have gone better, but we're at a time when we're doing a lot of backtracking in a lot of ways. But I do appreciate your work, and I think that's the importance of the diversity we see on screen. Like you talked about with Dr. Hirai, it's not important that he's Japanese, or what his ethnicity is. It's important that he's in the show, for everybody to see, to be one of the cast members.